Welcome to Bamfordrose and another question of the week. This week it's you've got 80k, do you buy a DB11 or do you buy a DBS? We're going to go out for a drive in both cars back to back and just give some comments about the drive experience and how the car makes you feel. We're not going to drive each car to the limit, assess its handling capability, its acceleration or dynamic performance. You can save that for the journos on the racetracks where it's all quite contrived because no one ever drives the car in those circumstances anyway, and most people just drive at normal road speeds and enjoy the car for what it is and enjoy the ownership experience. And it's that side of it that we're going to comment on in these videos now. So we're sat in a beautiful DB11. This one is a special edition AMR. Obviously this one is worth a little bit more than the 80k, but generally you can pick DB9 up, DB11 up for 80k, and you can find also good DBSs for the same price range. So these cars do exist at that crossover point. Now, I've been driving DB9, DBS, V8 Vantage all day today. It's pretty much the end of the day and we've jumped in this DB11, and immediately you can just feel a lot more relaxed in these seats. It's almost like you're sprawling out in these seats, whereas you feel quite cosseted in the older level car seat. I'm not sure how that's going to translate when you're on the go. It's probably going to mean you're going to move around a fair bit in these seats, but just immediately it just feels like you can sprawl out in this car compared to the older car. This DB11 is a behemoth. It's really, really big, and when you spend, like we do, predominantly our time driving around the older cars, to jump into this one, it's striking how big this car is. So parking it up in whatever car park you are, wherever you live, if it's not in your own grounds or a garage, parking it at the supermarket, going to the seaside in it, wherever it is, parking these cars is a lot different than parking the older cars. They are so much bigger. Styling wise, obviously the DBS is an awesome car. It's almost like a Vanquish from the classic days of Callum's Brute in a suit. Classic, understated, timeless. The looks of this DB11 is completely different than that. It's contemporary, and beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and people buy cars for different reasons. So it could be that the DBS is the more purist type buyer, whereas the DB11 is buying the latest, greatest, is buying tech, and they're two completely different buyers. The whole electronic dash display, again, it fits with the contemporary nature of the car. Personally, I'm an analog man, and give me old-fashioned, almost cable-driven dials any day. Let's go for a little drive and sample the AMR DB11. So the contemporary nature of the car has made its way to the engine also. The whole auto industry, to pass emission standards, has to downsize. This is to get raw gas volume at cold start to the lowest volume it can be to get through the emissions test. The emissions test, a 20-minute cycle, is all about the cold start. So as limits have been made tighter over each new emissions legislation level that came in, previous tricks of different technologies like secondary air injection have already been used, and the trick to get new cars through latest emission standard is to downsize to get that volume of gas at cold start the minimum it can be, and the whole auto industry has done this. Then to get back the power that they lost from the downsizing, the whole auto industry pressure charges. And that's exactly what's happened to this 5.2 V12 engine, which is a downsized 6-litre V12 engine. They've then gone and put 2 turbochargers on to get the power back, and it's delivering more power than the 6-litre naturally aspirated. This car with the AMR kit on is over 600 horsepower. We're taking the same loop as we ever do when we test the car. Although we're in GT mode for damping, this car is quite soft and bouncing all over the place. So much so, it even criticised the handling for being a bit boaty. Now, as I said earlier, driving the older cars all day, instantly you can feel some differences in this car. The floor pan feels a lot smoother, the steering wheel feels smoother. What I mean by that is there's a lot less vibrations coming from wheels, tyres, brakes, the engine, and it just gives you a little bit of a detached feeling, but at the same time you get a benefit of increased comfort. It's just as easy to drive as any Aston is. Certainly not sitting in the car, driving along feeling intimidated by the car. You know, you're not in some leery supercar. This just feels like almost a daily driver. So we're going to open it up along this road a little bit, just experience what this 5.2 twin turbo engine has to offer. Notice the benefit from the latest 8 HP transmission. Torque converter's a lot quicker, shifts are a lot sharper, a lot quicker, but it's got that typical pressure charged torque delivery where quite high up the rev range you've still got a lot of torque on tap. You could probably find yourself getting in a lot of trouble with that if you press the throttle pedal too far open around the wrong bend higher up the rev range. Whereas a naturally aspirated Screamer, it's past its peak torque value lower down the rev range, meaning that you can then accelerate and not worry too much about an excess of torque. That whole feeling of acceleration just feels evolved from the older car. It's really, really good. They've made a good sports car. I just think they've lost some Aston values along the way. Analog feeling sports car, classic understated looks, old-fashioned cabin. So it's a very competent sports car. Certainly not going to need any modification in the power engine department. Handles okay, brakes okay. As quirky and as unique as the glass key emotional control unit is in a DBS, there's just a lot to be said for this keyless start. You can keep the key from the DB11 in your pocket, press the brake pedal, hit the start button, and without any of that faff, you're on your way. The novelty value of the emotional control unit in the DBS is high, but the longevity of it is a little bit of a pain, and that's noticeable as soon as you jump in a DB11, that you can just relieve yourself of all that faff, have the key in your pocket, press the start button, and you're away. So this DBS on the market for about 80k, exactly the same as the DB11. So let's see what 80k in a DBS feels like. Sort of feel instantly like you're sitting on this instead of sitting in the DB11. I'm not sure that's a bad thing or a good thing, it's just different. Also, it just feels a heck of a lot smaller inside the cabin, and the whole car feels a heck of a lot smaller. That DB11, I'll say it again, is a behemoth. On the floor pan, on the seat, steering wheel, door, everywhere on rest of my arm, I can feel vibrations of the engine. Don't know whether that's a good thing or bad thing. It gives you more of a sports car feel in this, but the DB11 has got more of a luxury car feel. So for our money, we've got 510 horsepower and the ZF 6-speed, opposed to the ZF 8-speed in the DB11 with its near 600 horsepower. Whereas the DB11 is depreciating, the DBS is appreciating. DB11 is practically a new car, just out of 3-year maker warranty, shouldn't really have any problems. DBS, it's virtually 10 years old now, and it's going to need a little bit of TLC in a workshop, so there's a consideration also between the two cars. One will be pretty much painless ownership in terms of repairs in the workshop. The other, 10-year-old car, it's going to suffer 10-year-old car problems. I was doing 50 mile an hour down this country road, and instantly the cabin is a lot louder from tyre noise and wind noise in this DBS than it is the DB11. Now we're on the same stretch of road where earlier I commented that the DB11 was bouncing us all around and was feeling almost boaty. This DBS is in soft mode, adaptive at the moment, the same as what the DB11 was, but the ride just feels stiffer, yet it's almost more comfortable sat in this car than the DB11. The DB11 was struggling to cope with the bumps of a country road, whereas the DBS suspension is showing no signs of being upset by those bumps. So we're going to take the DBS through the rev range, through the gears, do an acceleration. Instantly, the tip-in brake performance of these carbon ceramics compared to the steels of the DB11 give a much sharper brake feel on the DBS. That's really noticeable. That first tip-in is super sharp, whereas the DBS pedal sort of travelled quite a bit and speed retardation was nowhere near as quick as this DBS. Through the rev range, if anyone, and I know there are a lot of owners that do this, have gone from 4.3, 4.7 V8 to a 6 litre V12 Vantage, then the difference in performance between this DBS and the DB11 is like going from a V8 to a V12. But because the way that DB11 delivers its power, pressure charged, it's almost too much power and it's almost unusable because it's real difficult to get traction down. Whereas this naturally aspirated Screamer, as soon as you get past low RPMs and you're into the 4, 5, 6,000 RPM region, obviously you're not going to break traction, certainly in the dry there, in gears above gear 2. Almost makes this easier to drive, but yet a more rewarding sports car to drive. I mean, the DB11 on this road was getting bounced all over the place, but the DBS is soaking the bumps up, and as a result, you get a much comfortabler ride, yet it's a sportier one. So after that drive, it almost feels a bit unfair to compare this DBS with the DB11. That's because the DBS instantly lets you know that this is a car that could tick the box of giving you a enthralling Sunday afternoon drive for 2 or 3 hours where you just want to drive spiritedly in the countryside. The DB11 isn't that. The DB11 is more grand touring. So that's why it feels a little bit unfair to compare the cars directly. But on the face of it, both are grand tourer cars. Certainly the DBS was billed as that in its day. The DB11 is going to give new car comfort that the older car won't give. It's going to tick the box of tech, electronic dash. It's going to be the latest and greatest. It's going to be the current car in production. All of those things are important to some buyers. The DBS is going to give you an analog sports car feel. It doesn't feel generic inside this interior. Sit inside any DBS and it's a real special place to be. It's a bit too soon to say, but all of the electronic architecture that falls over on the earlier cars, door modules, trackers, all that sort of stuff, doesn't feel like it's going to fall over on the DB11 at all, because they're sharing a lot of Merc technology on that car and it all feels a lot more robust. I kind of think a DB11 inside a workshop after it's had all its niggles ironed out after initial production during 3-year maker warranty, probably going to get an easier ride off a DB11. Only time will tell. So I think that shows you really how good a car DBS was, and probably a fairer comparison, or a more like-for-like realistic comparison, would be to jump into something like a 2013 plus DB9.2 and compare that against DB11. But then what are the values that you're buying the DB9.2 off? Because all of those values you'd get in the DBS. So it sort of is right to compare the DBS against the DB11. It's a curious crossover where DBS, DB11, DB9.2 all sort of overlap. Throw in the mix a Vanquish 6-speed or 8-speed, and why does a buyer choose any one of those cars over any of the others? Because they can all accelerate, handle, brake to a perfectly okay standard. Okay, some may be better than others, but that standard that they all perform to is adequate. Then it all has to come down to how you feel when you walk away from that car and take the look back at it, and how does each model make you feel. And that will come down to beauty is in the eye of the beholder. But I hope you liked that review of what to do with your 80k, buy DBS or buy DB11, and let us know what you choose. If you can like, comment and subscribe, that really helps us, and we'll see you in the next one.